twice removed, suddenly a great company of heavenly hosts appeared to the angel, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men, on whom his favor rests.
Shalom. Shalom. Greetings in the name of our Lord. My name is Malcus, and I've come to share my testimony with you tonight. In 4 BC, I was a part of the Temple of Jerusalem in Bethlehem. I lived there with my wife Myra. We had a son, and we called him Joshua. Joshua means Jehovah is salvation. But Joshua's name did not ring true for him. It was in 4 BC that Herod, who had become a part of the Galilean government at the age of 15, showed how cruel he could be. He ordered that all the children be destroyed. The soldiers came into our village, and I'll never forget that day. I was standing off at a distance, and I heard the women scream, and I saw them crying. And I went running toward my wife, screaming, "No, no, no, no!" Something hit me in the back of my head, and I was out for I don't know how long. And as I came through, I saw through the blood as it ran down my face, the soldier, as he took our son Joshua away from his mama, he cut him and threw him at her feet like so much garbage. I staggered to my feet, and I stumbled to my wife Myra, and I sat on the ground and I held her, and we rocked all night long. Myra sang the little songs, the lullabies to Joshua. And the next morning, out of necessity, I pried my dead child from my wife's arms to bury him. Bear in mind that it was against the law for me as a Jewish priest to even touch something that was dead. But it became necessary for me to force her to give it up. Joshua had a little corncob doll that we had made for him. Joshua had even cut his teeth on it. And now Myra carried that corncob doll with her everywhere she went. She carried it to the village well when she went to get water. She carried it about her home as she did her chores. She never put the doll down. She even called it Joshua. But Myra never got over her shock. And eventually she died of a broken heart that only a mother could have. Me, I began to question why the Roman government would want to punish our little village so badly, what we had done. And I learned that Herod had not been after all of our children, but after one child, the so-called Messiah child, the Christ child, who I learned that I don't know how they found out, but his parents found out about that, and they took and fled to Egypt to hide their child from the horrors of Herod. It was about this time that I began to hate with unreal hatred from the depths of my soul at what Jesus had cost me. The so-called Messiah had cost me my son, my only son, and my wife. 30 years came and go. I was accepted as a Pharisee. I had met and married my new wife, Mariah, whose name means provided by God. She's here with me tonight. Everything was going along well. And all of a sudden we began to hear about some of the other Pharisees, and I began to hear about a man called John the Baptist. John was living in the wilderness. John was beginning to talk about a man whose shoes he was not worthy to touch, and that was easy to understand, because I didn't want John touching my shoes either. So we went to go see John. We went to go see what he had to say. And as John saw us coming at him in the distance, John began to point at us and called us a generation of vipers. How could this man take tones with like them? It just made us so mad. And it wasn't very long after that we heard that John had been beheaded by Herod as a gift for a young lady for a dance. And I thought, that'll teach you to take tones with the men of God. But I also found out that John, before his death, had baptized the Christ. It was mass hysteria at that baptismal, because the people said that the heavens opened up and a dove came down and landed on Jesus' shoulder, and they heard the heavens speak with what they call the voice of Yahweh, and it said, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." Such ranting and ravings from foolish people made it hard to believe. But I began to become aware. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to know what was happening, because the day that I buried my wife, Myra, I took an oath on her grave that I would kill the Jesus that had cost me my wife and my child. And I planned to make good on that oath. So I began to watch and listen and look for the opportunities to make that oath good. One day we were going about our normal business, and somebody began to say, "Let's go over here." We went over there, and there was this teacher teaching, and he was standing on a mountain, and he talked about, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." He talked about, "Blessed are you when men shall revile you for my name's sake." He talked about childlike faith. He talked about how salt, when it has lost its savor, was good for nothing but to be cast out and trod under the foot of man. And it seared my heart with hatred. One day I saw one of our sect, a man named Jairus. And Jairus went to Jesus and he said, "Jesus, my daughter is sick." And I saw the hurt and the pain in Jairus' face. The servant came to him and said, "Master, don't bother the good teacher. She's dead." And I remembered all of the hurt that had been in my life when we buried Joshua. And I remembered all the anger and animosity, and it began to well up within my soul again. But I saw the compassion of Jesus as he reached over, as Jairus was falling. Jesus reached over and caught him and says, "Don't worry, only believe."
Yes, glory.
Only believe.
Praise.
I heard later that Jesus went to Jairus' home, and he walked in there. He took the child's mother, and he took one of his disciples, and he walked over to her bed and said, "This child does but sleep." And he reached down and he took her by the hand and he says, "Rise, little one." And then he ordered that she be fed. I think she was in a coma. I don't think she was dead at all. Even Jesus said she was asleep. I'll never forget the crowd that day as they began to push around and get close to Jesus. And suddenly Jesus stopped and said, "Who touched me?" And one of the inner circle of his own says, Lord, how can you say he touched me? Look at this crowd. And I'm thinking, this guy's crazy. And suddenly Jesus turned around and looked up his back trail, and as he looked the way that he'd come, the crowd began to slowly cry. And there was a wretched piece of a woman on the ground. And she said, I touched you. I spent all that I had trying to get healed of an issue of blood. It's been 12 years. And Master, I knew that if I could touch but the hem of your garment, that I would be made whole. And I saw the compassion in Jesus' face as he walked over to her, and he reached up to her, and he held her to her feet, and he looked her in her face, and he says, my daughter, thy faith has made thee whole.
Amen. Yes, praise God.
I heard him as he saw him, as he touched the sores on the leper, and I saw the sores healed. I heard him as he commanded demons, and the demons spoke to him. I had never heard such evil from anything or anybody, and yet the demons acknowledged him as the Son of the Most High God. And they obeyed his word. One day some of our Pharisees was with Jesus when Jesus cast out demons out of this other fellow. And our Pharisees said, this man does cast out demons, but by Beelzebub. And Jesus rebuked them and said that a kingdom that is divided against itself cannot stand. And if you do not gather with me, you scatter yourselves against me. And we knew Jesus had to go. We had to get rid of him. Suddenly one day in the temple, Jesus broke the law and he healed the man of a withered hand. He straightened it out. In the temple of all places, on the Sabbath day, Jesus healed. And broke the law. Some of my Pharisee brothers and I got together and said, he's got to go. We've got to do away with him. He's causing problems. I was there when the rich young ruler came and said, Master, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus says, give up all that you have and follow me. You know, I thought how foolish this was for him to even say that. Here's a man who did not have a pillow for his head, a roof to sleep under. He had nothing in this world except for the clothes on his back, and they were filthy. And yet he tells this ruler of men who has money to give up all that he has and come and follow him. And I kind of giggled to myself when the rich young ruler went away. And I won't ever forget the day that they caught the adulterous woman, and they were bragging her, and somebody said, that's him! Let's take her to Jesus! That's him!
crashing everywhere. He's asleep in the boat. Does he even care? We're all so afraid. He just keeps lying there. That's it. Then raised his hands above his head, said, "Peace, be still," and the waters fled away, and the wind on the shore said, "Shh, that's it."
We drug the woman to the corner that day, and we cast her like so much something or other that was dirty at Jesus' feet. We said, "Master, this woman hath been caught in adultery. What say you? The law says that we should stone her. And I already had my wife in my hand, but I don't like her good." And Jesus turned and looked at us and said, "Let he who is among you without sin cast the first stone." And I knew that I was unworthy, so my shoulders dropped, my hand went down. And then Jesus turned and he began to write in the dirt. I don't even remember if I saw what he wrote or not, but I know that the wrath of the crowd seemed to dissipate, and we all just kind of went away. I was there the day the lawyer went to Jesus, and he said, "Jesus," he says, "is it lawful for us to pay taxes unto Caesar?" For we knew that if we could get Jesus to say that we couldn't pay taxes to Caesar, that we could go and have Pilate kill him and do away with him and get shed of him, this blasphemer that was in our midst. Jesus said, "Let me see." And then this lawyer was a Pharisee, and he wasn't even supposed to have possession of the coin because it had Caesar's image on it. Jesus didn't even mention that. He took the coin from his hand and said, "Whose image is on it?" The lawyer said, "Caesar's." And he says, "Then render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God." We knew that we had to find another way to get him. We had set more traps for him. One day I walked up to Jesus when he was eating with publicans and sinners, and I said to his disciples, "Why does that master of yours eat with publicans and sinners? Does he not have any self-respect?" One of his disciples looked at me sort of funny, and Jesus turned and said, "They that are whole do not need a physician, but they that are sick."
Yeah. Praise you, God. Praise you.
It seared my heart because everything that we did, Jesus found a way to do. I was in the crowd that day in Bethlehem when we pushed him to the edge of the cliff and was going to throw him head first over the edge, and suddenly Jesus just walked out, and we couldn't move, and we couldn't understand why. We said, "What happened?" We had him. He was ours. He walked away without ever being touched. We knew his family. They were Joseph the carpenter and Mary, his brothers and sisters. And Jesus just walked away from us when we had him. We went to Caiaphas. It was pandemonium in Jerusalem during the time of the Passover. Jesus come riding in on this little donkey into the city, and people began to hail him as king. King of the Jews, they called him. And they threw down their coats. They took their coats off and threw them in Jesus' pathway. And they put palm leaves, and Jesus rode across and waved and smiled and loved them, and they loved him. And we went to Caiaphas and said, "Now look, Caiaphas, we got to do something about this. This ain't going to work. He is overthrowing us. He is a blasphemer. Jesus has got to go. Let's just take him real quiet out back, and we'll kill him, and we'll just leave him there, and that'll be the end of it." Caiaphas said, "No." He said, "If you do that, Pilate's going to come down on us with his armies, and we can't stand death." He said, "We're going to have to find another way." About that time, there was a gentle knock at the door. And we turned and we looked. And it was one of the 12 that came to the door, Judas Iscariot. He had overheard part of what we had been talking about, and he said, "I can get Jesus for you." Caiaphas says, what are you talking about? He says, I can get Jesus for you. He says, what do you mean you can get Jesus? He said, you know what I mean. I know where Jesus is going to be. I'll take you there. You follow me, I'll kiss him, and you take him. Caiaphas says, you'll turn your teacher in? He says, for a price. So there was some haggling, and it came up to be 30 pieces of silver. Caiaphas paid. We left, and we grabbed our staffs, and we knew that it was going to be good, because now we had Psalms, and God had smiled on us and gave us one of the inner circle to betray, and we were going to get to kill Jesus. We followed him to the Garden of Gethsemane that night. And as Jesus stood, he saw us coming in the distance, and he said, I was in the town day in and day out, and you never sought to touch me. Why are you out here with knives? Jesus walked up and kissed him. And the high priest's servant jumped in there to grab a hold of Jesus first, and when he did, Peter jumped about the same time and pulled out his knife and cut off his ear. Jesus reached over and very calm. I've never seen the kind of odds against Jesus, against any man, and Jesus showed utter calm. And he reached over and he said, put away your sword, Peter. For my Father has more than 12 legions of angels, if I will but ask. Jesus said, it is me that you seek. Let these others go. And I noticed that all the disciples fled like scared rabbits. We took possession of him, and we took him back to the hall. Caiaphas began to ask him questions, and he said, Jesus, who are you? Jesus, with still calm assurance, said, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And if I asked you, you wouldn't let me go. So because of this, the Son of Man shall set on the right hand and power of God. One of the soldiers was standing there, reached over and slapped Jesus. And Jesus said, have I spoke evil? Why smite ye me? The man kind of hung his head. Caiaphas, in the same instant, began to rip his clothes and said, we don't need any more witnesses. This man has spoken blasphemy, and he must die. He will die. See, we had the authority to pronounce death, but we did not have the authority to carry it out. So Caiaphas decided that he would go and talk to Pilate. As he was going to talk to Pilate, he began to smack Jesus and slap him and spit on him and say, if you're really the Messiah, tell us who you are. Who hit you? Jesus opened not his mouth. Went before Pilate a short time later, and Pilate asked him, says, who are you? Jesus didn't answer. He says, do you not hear what they're saying about you? Jesus says, go talk to them that I taught in the temple. What I did in public. I did it openly. I did it in front of everybody. Go ask them what I said. Pilate said he couldn't find anything. And Caiaphas says, look, this man's creating havoc from Galilee to Jerusalem. You've got to do something. The only thing that Herod heard, or that Pilate heard, was that he had to do something, and that he had come from Galilee, and the governor of Galilee, Herod, was in town, so he told him to take him to Herod. He took him to Herod. And Herod questioned him and beat him. And he says, we're in Jerusalem. This is Pilate's territory, so he went back to Pilate. Pilate talked to him some more and couldn't find anything wrong with him. Couldn't find anything that bore the idea of death worthy. And he stood before a great crowd and said, there's nothing wrong with this man. He's done no wrong. They began to scream and cry to crucify him. So Pilate decided that he would have him scourged, and he sent him off to be scourged. After he was scourged, they brought him back. Pilate stood him back on the platform. He said, this is the time of the Passover, and I can find no wrong in this man of Galilee. And he says, it is our custom to turn loose one of the prisoners. Do you want Barabbas, who is a robber and a murderer, or do you want Jesus, who is innocent? We had so many spies mixed in with the crowd that they began to cry with one loud voice, crucify him, crucify him, crucify saw that he had no choice but to crucify Jesus.